a printout from Mayo Clinic that I wanted to just briefly reference, and I remembered that today. So I'd like us not to start over, but to very quickly review some of the things we talked about. We started, remember, in Numbers chapter 11. Numbers chapter 11, verses 10 through 15. And this is Moses, and Moses seems to be frustrated, right? We got a lot of terms for this. But in Numbers chapter 11, starting in verse 10, now Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, each man at the doorway of his tent, and the anger of the Lord was kindled greatly, and Moses was displeased. So Moses said to the Lord, why have you been so hard on your servant? And why have you not found favor in why have I not found favor in your sight, that you have laid the burden of all this people on me? Was it I who conceived all this people? Was it I who brought them forth, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a nursing infant to the land which to which you swore to their fathers? Verse 13, where am I to get meat to give to all this people? For they weep before me, saying, give us meat that we may eat. I alone am not able to carry all this people, because it is too burdensome for me. So if you are going to deal thus with me, please kill me at once, if I have found favor in your sight, and do not let me see my wretchedness. Obviously, Moses is what would we say, at the end of his straw, at the end of his line. He's frustrated. He's got a tremendous amount of anxiety, I think, with his people burdening him, and God's wishes. And then on top of that, it just seems like he's all the way to the end, and he's like, Lord, take me now. I think sometimes that's a sentiment that you and I share, don't we? I mean, you've got to be pretty bad off to say, let it be over. And obviously Moses is doing that with the view that God is all powerful. God is the one that is in control. But I think to start out a discussion about depression, in fact, what we consider this disorder, maybe something more than just the blues, this is maybe a good place to start. And part of the question that we asked last week was, when we consider technology today, and we consider the help that you and I can go get from our medical professionals, and we know that there are drugs or medications now that can help in certain situations. You can't help but watch TV and see all these ads for these things, and sometimes we wonder, we're weighing in our mind, how good is this stuff? Is this for real? Can it actually help people or not? Especially when you consider all the side effects. But we have the blessing of being helped today. But what of God's people of old? Moses didn't have CVS or Walgreens down the street. He didn't have, I don't think, a psychiatric professional that could sit him down and maybe allow him to open his mind to them. What did they do? What did they have? How did they cope? How did they survive? And I think ultimately what we're going to see in this class is, even though we have those blessings, even though there may be clinical depression that can actually be helped by our professional community, God has some help for us as well. He has some answers for us. And we don't want to discount or forget his role in this. And of course, as a Christian, that should be paramount. That should be first. And so I'd like to start with the thought there that Moses was struggling to the point, even though he's God's chosen man to lead his people out of bondage, right? And you and I know the rest of the story. This becomes great symbolism for Christ himself, right? Coming in and freeing us from the bondage of sin. And so Moses is playing this pivotal, most important role in Old Testament time, and it was almost unbearable to him. It stressed him so greatly at times, and so that's where we started. I promised you this thing by the Mayo Clinic that talks about major depressive order, and it goes like this: depression is a mood disorder. Right away that catches me, because when we think of our makeup, our spirituality, our physicality, our physical body, you know. What is cancer? Well, cancer is attacking our physical body, right? So when we talk about depression, we are talking about a mood disorder. Now, we a lot of times we preach attitude, right? We talk about things like that. Well, that's getting very close to this, right? It is a mood disorder that causes a persistent feeling of sadness and loss of interest. Also called major depressive disorder or clinical depression, it affects how you feel, think, and behave, and can lead to a variety of emotional and physical problems. Isn't it interesting how a problem, we might say up here, or here with our mood, our you know, what did God call this with the first reference that I think we see this in Scripture was with Cain and Abel, right? What did God say to the one brother who brought the offering that wasn't as good? He calls it his countenance, right? And he warned him about that, about his countenance. So it can lead to a variety of emotional and physical problems. You may have trouble doing normal day-to-day activities, and sometimes you may feel as if life isn't worth living. So like I mentioned before, I don't know that Moses had clinical depression, but I'm pretty sure he had some anxiety as he heard the people wailing behind him, and God on the other side unpleased. I'm pretty sure he felt some depression in that moment. We hear it as the woe is me attitude, right? Coming from him, which is, by the way, a theme in the Old Testament where man is pushed to the brink and he turns back to God and says, why? David, Solomon, Job, Moses. Name a strong man there that didn't turn back to God and say at some point, why me? Why are you doing this to me? Why am I being allowed to suffer? And more often than not, they got an answer, right? And so this is what we're dealing with. The symptoms. Although depression may occur only once during your life, people typically have multiple episodes. During these episodes, symptoms occur most of the day, nearly every day, and may include. Now, remember, this is clinical depression. So this would be a depression that a medical professional would say that you have this major clinical depression. This is not I have the blues today, or I'm a little down because something happened. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that get us down, right?
Big difference between clinical and situational.
Right.
Situational person can have that,
Yep.
and they definitely not classified as the clinical.
Yep. There was a morning I got up.
Difference.
There was a morning I got up years ago and couldn't find my dog. And it wasn't until I drove out to the driveway and looked down there that I saw a brown lump on the road. And that changed my day. That put me in a tough spot for a couple days. I mean, I was sick of people. I was like, all I could see was the bad in everybody, you know? And it's just, that's a tough time. But that's not clinical depression. Clinical depression is something a little more severe. So some of the symptoms involving that. Feelings of sadness, tearfulness, emptiness, or hopelessness. Angry outbursts, irritability, or frustration, even over small matters. Loss of interest or pleasure in most or all normal activities, such as hobbies, sports, and intimacy. I really feel for here you have, we all have relationships, right? But then to our mate, the one that struggles with this, think of the pressure and the burden that puts on a mate. This is tough, and I would imagine that this consumes a lot of marriages when this enters that realm. Sleep disturbances, including insomnia or sleeping too much, tiredness, lack of energy, even small tasks take extra effort. Reduced appetite and weight loss or increased cravings for food and weight gain. It seems like our bodies and our psyche, one person at one point will go off feed, as we say in the animal realm, right? Quit eating, the next person will eat the themselves. And so we are quite a creature, aren't we? But this can slingshot either way. Anxiety, agitation, or restlessness. I think for most of us, as we study this, it's maybe not so much going to be about clinical depression, but it's going to be the effects of anxiety, or we might call those things stress, right? It's the situations that we, when we stop and think about it, it's situations that we have put ourselves in that cause us these anxieties in so many cases, whether it's the bills that are coming due that we've got to pay, or the relationship that is causing us a great deal of struggle, or what have you. So many times these things seem to be self-imposed, and not all the time, but that seems to be the case. Slowed thinking, speaking, or body movements. I think we've probably all been around people that have suffered like this, and you start to see these symptoms, don't you? You start to recognize these things. Feelings of worthlessness or guilt, fixating on past failures, or self-blame. You know, we just finished a study about forgiveness, and towards the end of that study, when we talked about, we started by talking about the forgiveness that God offers us and how we need to appreciate that, and how we need to keep that in context of what a great thing the blood of His Son is for us. But we worked our way all the way to forgiveness of one another as we interact with one another and we wrong one another, to forgiveness of ourselves, which is kind of a misnomer because God is the one that forgives. But here we have the same situation, right? Where we have feelings of guilt or fixation upon the past with failures or self-blame. And so often as a time, God has forgiven. God has given us that gift of grace and forgiveness, and we continue to hold it, or we continue to struggle with that. I really believe that is nothing more than Satan working his magic on us and keeping us pulled down. But so is the case with major depressive order, that these individuals tend to struggle with these problems. Trouble thinking, concentrating, making decisions, and remembering things. Frequent or reoccurring thoughts of death, suicidal thoughts or suicidal attempts. Unexplained physical problems such as back pain or headaches. I think so many times we will be struggling mentally, and it manifests physically. And we wonder why the headaches or why the back pains. And I'm afraid that a lot of times it's not because we tweaked our back. Our body is revolting. It's physically stressed because of our countenance, if you will. For many people with depression, symptoms usually are severe enough to cause noticeable problems in day-to-day activities such as work, school, social activities, or relationships with others. Some people may feel generally miserable or unhappy without really knowing why. And so that's kind of a symptom overview of depression. When to see a doctor. If you feel depressed, make an appointment to see your doctor or mental health professional as soon as possible. If you're reluctant to seek treatment, talk to a friend or a loved one, any healthcare professional, a faith leader, or someone else you trust. And I mentioned this last week. I think I appreciate the author of this, which is ultimately the Mayo Clinic, for including the idea of faith in this, because you and I all know that can make a huge difference. That can be all the difference. But I think a lot of times our medical community has been running away from that side of the component, neglecting that. And here we are talking about the very thing that faith has the greatest attributed factor to, would be our countenance or our mind, our well-being within our head. And you and I have all known people that have physically lived a miserable life. That because of a genetic defect or injury or accident or just some chronic health condition have suffered. But their mental capacity and their countenance or their aptitude of their mind was brilliant, was inspiring. And people like that are inspirational to me. When I think of my woes and my hurts and my pains, and I'm a little gloomy, and then I look to that individual, that really just bolsters me, makes me want to do better. And here's an individual, unfortunately, most times of good relative health, but is brought low because of a mental disorder. And so I truly believe there are cases where people need to go seek professional help in that regard. And I guess when we consider God's people of old, where maybe God dealt with them differently. Maybe today you and I have medical professionals we can go seek out. Maybe he had a measure for those people of old. I would like to think he did. And so whether it be one of these individuals that we're about to talk about, that his hand was upon them, perhaps in a different way than it is upon me today. He's God. He could do that. And so I'd like to think that. Any thoughts about that before we move on? Yes, Ray.
You want to go ahead?
Ray first.
Well, I'm just sitting here listening and thinking to myself, because I can speak to this a little bit because it's something I have experienced since I was a teenager, to the extent of being on medication for it and receiving the clinical side of things. And it's a challenge, but I can tell you where the relief spiritually comes from is knowing that God is still in control, and that my ability to catastrophize my own existence is not necessarily the reality of things, and that God maintains his position as King of the universe regardless of how I feel about myself. And that has been a beneficial thing for me to learn, especially as I grow older, that depression is something that can be managed. It is not something that you can get rid of necessarily. There's no magic pill for it, but through the appropriate treatment, and I firmly believe that medicine is one of God's gifts to mankind. I don't think anybody would argue with that. I think he has made it easier for us to cope with the fact that we are living in a fallen world, and it's important to remember that when we have relief from the symptoms, that we need to give God glory for that. And it's not just, today's a good day because for no apparent reason. It's because God has given me a moment of respite from this experience that I get to live with.
Yeah, one thing you said early on there reminds me of how God is always there, and he can be a fixed point in our life. Yes. When the whirlwind of life is carrying us to and fro, we can find God in his station, and he'll be there for us. Just like we talked about several weeks ago about how he's the God that sees. He does not abandon us. He does not leave us. He is always there. And so many times it's us who wanders away, or who seemingly life carries out of his presence. And we can always be assured that he is at his station. Mark.
When you were speaking, it made me think of Devo at Dan's and Rhonda's one evening around the campfire on Saturday night. I think Mitch Baby talked on it, and he said all depression comes from anger turned inward. And I had never heard that phrase before, but more I thought about that, I never forgot that, because any situation I see, it's usually involves anger, whether it's angry at yourself, angry at somebody else that you can't let go of, and you just let it fester, and it turns to a point of depression because it's
Sure.
an infection within you. And you can look at, our example, you gave us a biblical example,
Mhm.
with Moses, or the other ones.
Mhm.
They were all angry over something, you know,
Right.
and it ended up turning inward. And another thought there is leadership.
Mhm.
They were all men that were put in leadership
That's right.
positions by God.
Yeah.
And that's something all people should understand, whether you're the volunteer that's volunteering to coach the football team, the
Right.
Pee Wee football team, or you're on the school board, or you're president of the United States, or an elder.
Mhm.
There's a lot of stress and anxiety that
Right.
comes with being in leadership roles.
Yeah.
And that's something all people in situations of leadership struggle with at times. It's like, why did I agree to do this? Why did I wanna go for politics? You know, why did I wanna be an elder? You know, when
Right.
certain situations arise, and that's, you know, where Satan can take our hearts and get us bitterly angry
Right.
to the point where it affects us physically. Another real quick thought, cows. All of us that are in the dairy industry for years and years now have been talking about cow comfort and the stress on cows and how vital it is to have them in a stress-free environment. Sometimes I think we're more worried about cows than we are humans.
Yeah, right.
We're the same way.
Right.
I think of a book Dad gave me one time on none of these diseases or something like that, talking about the effects of stress and our physical well-being. And we're just like cows, you know, we want cows that no stray voltage,
Right.
perfect feed, perfect ventilation, temperature. And they will produce, and they will be a good servant for you,
Yeah.
and they'll live a longer life, and they'll give you tons of milk. And we're the same way. If
Yeah.
we have that depression, it's gonna affect our service to God and our well-being all the way around, including
Yep.
physical.
Yep, it's a good thought. I had a theory that, or have a theory that cows can handle one stress. Some cows can handle two stresses and still be very productive. 3 stresses on a cow equals a dead cow. They do not do well with stress. And I think some people naturally do not deal with stresses very well. And I think when we can recognize that and then safeguard ourselves or take care of ourselves, shield ourselves from those things, the better off we'll be. Yes, yeah.
I might just add to that, you know, when we're converted in Christ, we repent, we have a change of heart, change of mind, and change of purpose in life. And when we lose sight of that and understanding that God will work it out, whatever,
Yep.
let His will be done, when we lose sight of that, we got all kinds of problems.
Right.
It's not just, you know, mental or
Right.
it turns into all kinds of stuff, so.
Right.
I think that should be our prayer for the most part. Lord, let your will be done and help me to see it.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, Scripture tells us to beware of how we plan, right?
Yep.
And you know, I find this remarkable. We start out young and they ask us, you know, we're asked, what do you want to be? And one day it turns from firefighter and astronaut to something that's actually, though those positions exist, something a little more common. And so we become the accountant, the banker, the farmer, the whatever. And we go through this educational process and we have all this focus, and so many times it's so focused. And yet we don't know what God's plan is for us. And His plan may not for us to be that. Life may do something to us or affect us in a way that we have to change. What is the average now career occupational changes in an individual's life? Is it not 4 or 5? I mean, it's considerable number.
Every 7 to 8 years.
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to tack on to what everyone has said is that us accepting the alignment of what we expect. Every one of these, even Abraham, all of them, Moses, they expected something different than God's will.
Yeah.
And that is where that conflict, that internal conflict comes in.
Yeah.
Yes, that would have been very stressful for all of those people to be coming to Him and complaining.
Yeah, I think Mark's comment too about the anger, I mean,
Absolutely.
that is definitely, one of the, primary, things going on here with Moses in this reading.
A
this morning.
malalignment of
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
we expect than what the Lord's
Yep.
will is.
So there are, when we think about causes of clinical depression, to finish up this item here from the Mayo Clinic, there are things that maybe make us more susceptible, I would suggest, to this condition. Biological differences. People with depression appear to have physical changes in their brain, or changes in their brain. The significance of these changes is still uncertain, but may eventually help pinpoint causes. So as technology gets better and medical research continues, they see alterations within the brain itself with clinically depressed people. And this is probably going to help lead to medications or something like that to help that. Brain chemistry. Neurotransmitters are naturally occurring brain chemicals that likely play a role in depression. Recent research indicates that changes in the function and effect of these neurotransmitters and how they interact with neural circuits involved in maintaining mood stability play a significant role in depression and its treatment. And so almost you get the impression of a short-circuiting or a situation where a person's brain is not calculating these things. The chemistry is not quite correct there to make this work as it would in another individual. So could make a person more prone to this issue. Hormones, this is something we talked about last week. Changes in a body's balance of hormones may be involved in causing or triggering depression. Hormonal changes can result with pregnancy and during the weeks and months after delivery, postpartum, and from thyroid problems, menopause, or a number of other conditions. And so we discussed that last week. Depression for menopause or postpartum, these are not clinical depression, but they can be onset or a precursor to a clinical problem. Inherited traits. Depression is more common in people whose blood relatives also have condition. Researchers are trying to find gene connections that may be involved in causing depression. So, a lot of times when you go to a physical or checkup, they ask about previous history concerning various things. And with depression, this is something that can be seen through family lines. I don't know about you, but I know of families that have struggled with suicide, that have had an uncle, a son, a grandparent way back that have committed suicide, and it seems to run generationally or through a family. So I'll tell you, that's very important. If that's part of our family makeup, that's something I want to be aware of and something I want to think about, to be concerned with. And I think as I read these things, you see warning signs and you're thinking of things, you might be thinking of your own children. And that's frightening to consider that they may be struggling with something like this. And is this just a case of the blues? Is this just being a bad case of being down? Or is there something clinically here that's about to take hold? And that is something that I think we worry about. The occurrence in women is higher, but they don't know if that is because of, I think we mentioned this last week too, unfortunately women go through this tremendous hormonal change, chemical imbalances within their body with childbearing and menopause and being married to a man, I think. And so they have this great stress upon them, but they say they're not even sure that is the case, that women have a higher occurrence, or if men just don't come get checked out. And my guess is it's the same. Men just don't get checked out because there's the stigma of not having a problem or not wanting a problem or being bullheaded and not fixing a problem. So that's men for you, yes.
One thing, all of these things that were mentioned here today is being found out over in the UK and studies over there.
Yeah.
Is the microbiome of the intestinal tract. And they are finding that is a precursor to diabetes, it's a precursor to heart disease, to depression, to all of these things. So as the world gets more knowledge, right?
Mhm.
That is something that I think really is holding some promise as to what could be, you know,
Mhm.
looked into for further, cures or
Sure.
helping with those
Sure.
disorders.
Yeah, you know, we look at, you know, everything we do, right? I don't care if you go to the gas station, there's a help wanted sign on the door. Or if you need, dental work, how far are you gonna have to drive? You know, we are lacking people everywhere, it seems, motivated people to do things. Unfortunately, we're lacking that in our medical profession now too. And can you imagine the research, the things that should be happening that are not happening because of the lack of people? And so we've talked about several examples. We talked about David in Psalms chapter 6, Elijah, 1 Kings 9, in 1914. Remember, Elijah was dealing with despair after the confrontation with the prophets of Baal, and he had this great victory, right? He stood up for God, he challenged those prophets, God was shown to be all powerful, and then yet he's hiding and running for his life in the wilderness, and he has this woe is me mentality towards God, right? And God says basically then, you don't understand. There's 7,000 have not bowed the knee, and I have kept them. And so when he thought he was all alone, he really wasn't. And I guess it's reminiscent to you and I when we get caught in these situations when we start to lash back at God. We just don't know what he has in store. And so many times we can't see the forest for the trees. We're unwilling to just give that to him. Maybe release that anger and give that to God. I think we ended at Job chapter 7 last week. Job, of course, when we think of suffering, we think of going through things. You've got to. You automatically, it seems like, go to Job. Job chapter 7, starting in verse 13. If I say my bed will comfort me, my couch will ease my complaint, then you frighten me with dreams and terrify me by visions, so that my soul would choose suffocation, death, rather than my pains. I waste away, I will not live forever. Leave me alone, for my days are but a breath. Well, what is man that you magnify him, and that you are concerned about him, that you examine him every morning and try him every moment? Will you never turn your gaze away from me, nor let me alone until I swallow my spittle? Have I sinned? What have I done to you, O wretched, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target, so that I am a burden to myself? Why then do you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now I will lie down in the dust, and you will seek me, but I will not be. You know, I think Job here in chapter 7 is getting really frustrated, right? And he's really starting to question everything. Now, God has an answer for him, right? I mean, God's going to set him straight here eventually. And Job is going to once again realize his place and see that God is in control, and that all he has to do is cling to him. But you see the despair, right? You see the raw emotion coming out of him. And at reading this, you want to say, "Duck, Job! Here comes the lightning."